Okay, for our second tech chat, we're going to have Nigel Toon, who is President and CEO of Exmos. It's a totally different business from what we just talked about. And the moderator is Simon Tethey, who is the publisher of Tech City News. So welcome them to the stage. I think we can see how we're progressing along the startup chain. Arnold's company is really young, and Exmos is a little older. And so take it away. Thank you.
Welcome, Nigel. I know you was expecting to be quizzed by Ben Rooney, but I'll see what I can do in short notice.
Sure, you'll do a much better job. Yeah.
Much better looking. Right. Okay, so you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, so the people who don't know, and your company as well?
Sure. So I'm an electronics engineer by background, worked for American Silicon Valley-based companies, then I guess just over 10 years ago got into this whole startup game. Together with 3 other people, we started a chip startup in Bristol that we raised nearly $150 million of venture capital for. Grew that business. That ended up being sold to NVIDIA for $400+ million. And then I was CEO of another chip company that we sold for about $100 million. And now I'm in Exmos. Literally on the day that we sold previous company PicoChip, a guy called Herman Hauser, who some of you may know from Amadeus, he called me up and said, "Nigel, what about Exmos?" I said, "Well, can I have a cup of tea first and think about it?" But I got involved in Exmos about 18 months ago, and we're sort of building the business. And I think having sold 2 businesses, the idea with Exmos is actually we want to try and build something and see if we can take it public. So that's very much the goal within Exmos.
And what exactly does Exmos do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So it's very different from probably what many of the people here are involved with in Tech City. So we make semiconductors, and so I would say raising money for a hardware company is difficult. Or raising money for any company is difficult. Raising money for a hardware company is probably even more difficult. Raising money for a chip company, I'd say, is almost impossible. But we just closed a $14 million round in December, and we're bringing some strategics in through the first quarter as well. So we should be able to top that up quite nicely as well. And what we're doing is reason I think we're able to get funded is we're doing something rather unique. So designing chips is difficult. And there's the arcane languages like Verilog and register transfer languages to design chips. There are some programmable chips around that you can program, but they're typically very expensive and they're very power hungry. We have a technology that basically allows people to create their own piece of hardware by programming using code, using C language. And so people can create their own features on the chip by programming in software, and obviously add all of the compute algorithms as well, and combine that together. So it allows people to innovate new products and applies in a wide range of applications. So we've got customers on one extreme, companies like Sony, who are using us to make new consumer products, sort of add-ons to mobile phones, accessories for mobile phones. We've got trendy companies like Native Instruments and Ableton. Maybe you've heard of these companies if you're into clubs and stuff. They make DJ equipment that allows you to create new types of music, and the sort of digital electronics at the heart of those are all based on our chips. And we've got, feeding on from the conversations before, we've got customers who are making robots. And good example, we've got a customer in Japan who was building this humanoid robot, and they couldn't get it to walk because it's actually quite a hard problem. And with our chip, they were able to program in software directly to the hardware, and the response time was fast enough that they could actually get the robot to walk. So actually, we think the whole area of robotics is very, very interesting for our chip. I guess I'd slightly disagree with some of the comments. I think the problems are so complicated that it's going to be a long time before these machines start taking over people's jobs. But in terms of helping, I think we are going to see machines that help in certain ways, certainly in the next few years.
So as you said, you just raised £14 million from, $14 million.
Dollars,
sorry. Exchange rates. All right.
Sounds bigger.
So obviously you got a growth plan in place.
Yeah, no,
now, you was part of
definitely.
David Cameron's delegation to
Yeah, we
China.
were. Yeah.
Now, what did you get out of that?
So yeah, I'm interested from the previous conversations actually. So my impressions, having worked a little bit in China, a previous company we had an R&D center in Beijing. We've got a team that we're building up in Shenzhen. Actually, you know, again, you talk to some of the government officials, you know, UKTI, and you know, everywhere around the world. And I probably shouldn't say this, but everywhere around the world, UKTI actually can't help you at all. Yeah, it doesn't really work. But actually, in China, you know, government is quite important, and having connections with government is seen to be important by Chinese companies. It raises your profile. So I think actually, you know, involving yourself a little bit in government activities related to China can actually help you in terms of building those high-level relationships in China.
Now, on my sort of like preparing for here, when I just doing a little bit, you said that 30% of your growth might be coming from the Chinese market.
Yeah, I think if we look sort of across the world, we think about our business in two ways actually. So there's the customers we're really selling to are the creative companies who are creating the products. So design engineers who are actually designing these exciting new products. And so those are the people we're really selling to. But actually when they come to make the products, a lot of the time the product is actually physically made in China. So probably today, actually half of our business is shipped, and the invoice, if you like, is made in China. But the design is principally done today for our company anyway in North America and in Europe. And but as we expand, actually what we're seeing is this massive growth of new customers and new opportunities in China on the design side. And so there's a much bigger focus to actually develop there. And that's really where I think a lot of the growth can come from in our business.
Now, when you're obviously looking to expand to China, there were concerns about the IP, and you're what you call a virtual manufacturer. So your whole capital is about in your IP.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So what factors did you take into consideration, and what do you need to consider before you actually expand to the China market?
So actually from the beginning of the company, we're obviously IP is a big part of our business. It was also protected by the sophistication of the technology. Building chips is difficult, so there's some level of sophistication, but you can't rely on that. You've got to have fundamental patents behind the technology as well. And we took a strategy in the company from the very early days to actually patent in the major markets, and that includes China. So all of our fundamental patents, we've actually got Chinese patents, and as we apply new patents, we're applying for patents in China, and we think that's an important part of being able to protect our business long term. So that's the first step. But again, I think the whole idea of the copycat thing, especially in sort of sophisticated technology, it's slightly overstated actually, you can work with companies and trust them, and equally we're quite open with a lot of our certainly at the software level. We want to try and make it open as possible, because there's so many innovative companies who can build products on top of our chips that we need to be open. I actually see some of the challenges in China being a little bit different. I think typically, certainly the more, if we call semiconductor a more historical technology business, it's not that old, but I guess in the context of the way things move, it's a bit more historical. And we've been very lucky because it's been driven primarily as an English language technology. And everywhere you go in the world, you just speak to people in English, and you give them an English data sheet and English documentation, and everybody just acts to learn to do that. It doesn't work in China.
Did you have to arrange for local partnerships? Did you have to make so?
Yeah, no, very much so. So we've got obviously sales partnerships, but also design partners who help to provide support locally. The other thing that you find is that often in China the value chains are much more segmented. So you'll have a company specialized in manufacture, you'll have a company that's specialized in brand, and you'll have a company that's specialized in actually doing the sort of R&D development work. And these people will work together to create the product. So you've got to be able to interface with these different pieces and have partners who can bring the right expertise to the different pieces of the value chain as well.
You obviously, you've been very experienced, and you've traveled to China and worked on there long before. Now, when you arrange these partnerships, how do you go about making sure that you get the right partners? because obviously it's like a marriage. You want to make sure that you get the right wife.
Yeah, never get to the point where you actually have to look at the contract because you know you're in trouble. Yeah. So again, I think a lot of that comes from having been involved in the industry for many years. You know, people that I've worked with before, you know, it's been an interesting phenomenon actually. You know, when I was kind of traveling to Silicon Valley, and I obviously still do, you know, a lot of the people, you know, you'd meet people who were Chinese, you know, been born in China and they'd moved to Silicon Valley to try and further themselves. Over the last 5-10 years, these people are all moving back. They're all going back to China because that's where the opportunity is. So a lot of the people that you know you kind of networked with 5-10 years ago in Silicon Valley, a lot of these people are now in Shenzhen or they're in Shanghai, and so actually you know there's a sort of level of trust with those people that you can kind of you know them, you've had relationships with them, they understand the Western side, they obviously understand the Chinese side, and they're fantastic in terms of creating that bridge between the two spots. And actually the guy running our business in China is one of those people, you know, somebody we worked with before who's gone back, wanted to go back, so you know we helped him to go back, and you know he's helping build the business based out of Shenzhen.
So most of your products, in the sense that the clients who are using your chipsets in their products, are they for export or are they for the domestic consumption?
I think they start. Yeah, that's a thought-provoking question. I think most of the customers are looking at products that they can sell outside of China today. And maybe that's unique to where we are in the business. But you know, I think most of our Chinese-based companies are looking to sell outside China. And also, you know, what we're also finding is a lot of the multinationals are setting up design groups in China as well to leverage the huge numbers of really talented engineers who are coming out of Chinese universities. And you know, so that's another phenomenon I think that we see as well.
Now, one thing also I know from having dealt with China for a little while is that the local companies are fiercely competitive.
Yeah.
Okay, very, very much
Yeah.
so. And they have the local connections, they have the political connections, they have the advantage
Yep.
of the local market knowing. How do you compete in such an environment?
Do something different from what they're doing, yeah. You know, if you're trying to compete on a one-for-one basis, then you just stand no chance. You know, again, I would say the barriers to entry in China are very, very high. And unless you've got something really innovative and unique, you're really going to struggle. And I think the other thing I'd characterize, you know, we had this development group, previous company in Beijing, and we put somebody on to a project, and they'd go, the engineer would go home and they'd tell their husband or they'd tell their wife, they'd say, well, I'm really sorry, I'm going to be at work for the next 3 months because I just need to get this thing done. And they just pile in and they just work really, really hard. And the expectation is that if you're supplying product or you're supplying technology to these companies, that's the way they're working. And the expectation is that you're going to do exactly the same. You know, it's like, what do you mean you're on your weekend? What do you mean you're on holiday? You know, we're in the middle of this stuff and I want an answer. And the expectation is that you're working as hard as they are, and they're working harder than we are in the West, I'll tell you that.
So basically, how do you see your growth happening in the next 5 years, Siward?
Well, we're very ambitious, I guess, in our targets. You know, we're still modest size today, but you know,
a little company in Cambridge who does similar sort of stuff. Well,
yeah, no, they've been Arm. They've been very successful. We're obviously a little bit further down the chain. We're actually making we outsource the manufacturer. We're actually supplying the chips. But you know, we do believe that there is an opportunity here that we're in a spot where we think we can build a really, really big business. You know, so we talk about, you know, we've got a $5 billion market opportunity, really addressable market opportunity with our business. And so the idea that over the next 5-10 years we build $1 billion business is that's the kind of ambition we have.
Oh, I'd like to hear it. I mean, in a sense,
I'll get my white cat out and start
most
stroking,
most semiconductor companies, British-based semiconductor companies, end up getting bought out.
Yep.
Now, what is? I mean, your level of ambition? Will you say no to 100 million,
well,
200
you know,
million? Will you say at what point will you say okay, maybe?
Any venture-backed business, I would say, is always for sale. But I think the difference is that one of the things, particularly in semiconductors, you know, the classical way of doing it is you come up with some idea, you focus it on a vertical market, you run fast, you get that product out there, and then it's almost impossible to take that business public because you're going to face one of the big boys in the industry, and your big customer, you're always worried that from one quarter to the next you're going to lose your big customer, and so inevitably what they do is they end up selling to one of the big companies, but obviously that just caps the value potential in the business. As soon as you sell, you've just capped the value potential. So what we're trying to do is to build a much broader base business where we don't have one customer, we've got thousands. We're not in one industry, we're in consumer, we're in industrial, we're in automotive, all these different segments. And with that portfolio kind of business, you can typically, we're selling at slightly more modest volumes, we've got more designs, more customers, we're selling at much higher margins. Little secret, we're doing 68% gross margin in a hardware business. So that shows the sort of intellectual property we have in the product. And so if we can, last year we grew nearly 100% in the business, and we can continue that kind of growth spark with those kind of capital efficient business. That really can create a very valuable business, we think.
So the goal for going public, where do you think that might be? We're here in London. AIM?
Yeah, no, again, classically everybody's thought about NASDAQ, and the two previous companies, we actually set them up as Delaware Corps with the idea that we were either going to sell to an American company or we were going to go public on NASDAQ. But I think the whole Sarbanes-Oxley thing has changed that, actually. Yeah. And, London, you might not get the same valuation on the London Stock Exchange, but if you've got a value business that is going to be, high margin, high growth, eventually the values will equalize. So you might go out at a slight discount, but if you're really confident in the growth potential in the business, I think the values will equalize. So I think London would be, also an interesting target for us as a public market.
Hey to that.
Yeah, any questions out there?
Hi, my name is Cyrus from CBBF. I have a question regarding selling internationally and in relation with GPM, gross profit margin, and the strategies that you choose in terms of going to bed with partners abroad, like in the West, and as opposed to ASEAN states, which is much more protectionist borders are much lower in ASEAN states than it is in abroad in the West. In mitigating the risk, you can pick up channels like finding distributors. You can go M&A, or you can set up your own headquarters from scratch.
Right.
What would you say is the optimum policy strategy that will marry best GPM with selling products internationally?
So I can kind of speak for our industry and our approach. I think what you've got to do is you've got to have your own local presence, and that local presence, needs to be your own people. And the key thing, if you're going to have an international office anywhere, is you've got to absolutely trust the person. Small company, you've got to absolutely trust the person who is in that local market acting for you, and then they become the control person on the ground who can, use their contacts to bring on the best partners, the best distributors, and they can actively drive and manage and bring the message, because the message is typically quite complex. They can bring that message to your local partners and make sure that they're all acting and working, in the right direction, pointing in the right direction. So I think it's that combination of having your own trusted people, managing local partners is the right approach for an international. I think other people do it different ways, but that's kind of our approach.
Yes, my name is John Pickup, Abington Systems. I've been working with and for Chinese for about 20 years now, actually, and I've got a philosophical question to do with education and innovation. Now, the conventional wisdom in the West is that the education in China is pure rote learning. Memorize, write it down, memorize. And I've got to declare an instance. I've got 3 grandchildren, half English, half Chinese grandchildren in Singapore. And it seems to be like that in early stages. But then it seems as if there's a disconnect. There's a phase change, because you've referred to creativity and innovation. what happened? When did it happen? I've seen it myself, but I'm still puzzled by it. And the 100,000 PhDs per year coming out of China, people say, yeah. But of course, they're very superficial, blah, blah, blah. Personally, I say rubbish, but that's a different story. There does seem to be a disconnect between perception and reality, and I'd welcome your view on that.
I think it's complex. I think it's a very complex question in many ways, and probably it's a complex answer. But so my personal view of it is that in engineering, it's logarithmic. So for every 100 engineers, there will be one engineer who's able to put 2 and 2 together and make 100. Who can see the problem from a different perspective and can say, look, actually, if we do this and this together, we'll solve this problem that, actually you put 100 people in a room, they'd never solve the problem. They'd never have that insight. And so it's almost a function of numbers. If you've got enough people with enough skill within that group, there will be a few of those bright sparks who can actually come up with the innovative answers and can create those technology breakthroughs. And the trick, and the reason why small tech companies do much better than big tech companies is that a lot of those people actually their human interface is quite difficult sometimes, and it's a management problem. If you can bring those people through, you can get them involved, you can get them to understand what the problems are, you can show them to them, they'll solve the problem where hundreds of other people couldn't, and that's why big companies sometimes struggle with innovation as well. And so I think the Chinese are as capable of doing that and bringing those people through and creating those innovations as everybody else, and what you need is the fundamental maths, the core skills that allow you to understand the problems and to bring it through. So I think it's just a function of numbers, actually, and applying people in the right ways. So I wouldn't say there's any, that China, Europe, that we've all got a natural advantage necessarily there, and I just think it's a function of using people in the right ways. I think one of the reasons I think London and UK is very good at creative is that we actually quite like eccentric people. We're quite happy with eccentrics, and we're quite happy to involve them in things. A lot of time these people are a bit eccentric, and we're happy to deal with them, work with them, and because we can see what value they create. And so that's probably the bigger issue is if you have this very structured organizations, you typically won't accept these kind of eccentrics as being massive value creators in your business.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing such a spark of China entrepreneurship, because they're in smaller groups. They can be nonconformists. They can be different.
Yeah. No, I think that's right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Nigel.